On today's show, the Cavs might want to keep the core four together, but splitting it up makes the most sense.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. The best way you can help grow the show. Listen every day. Leave a 5-star review. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Like the video on YouTube. We are available free and everywhere you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Also, really want to do a mailbag episode coming up to close out this week, aiming to do that on Friday. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, leave a comment on YouTube. You can tweet me at RealDCunningham. You can email the show at Locked On Cavs. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. I'm Danny Cunningham, back for day number 2 as Locked On Cavs host. You might know me from my days covering the Cavs at 92.3 The Fan, at Cleveland Magazine, previously at ESPN Cleveland. I've been around this team for quite a while now, was around during the LeBron James era, the second one that is. I'm not necessarily old enough to have been a professional back when LeBron was in Cleveland the first time, but was around for much of that second era. Also, once upon a time, covered the Minnesota Timberwolves for Score North, have covered the Milwaukee Bucks up in Wisconsin, and have done some NBA draft and NBA coverage for Complex. We will be getting into draft talk a little bit coming up later on in this month. I know some of you out there are asking about that. We will get to the draft talk. The Cavs have the number 20 overall selection. But on today's show, the Cavs have been reported that they're not that interested in breaking up the core four. They're not exactly aggressive in listening to trades. That was reported by Yahoo Sports late last week. I don't think that's the right idea. I think that to get the most out of this team, to get the most out of this group, splitting it up is the right answer. I'm not saying everything needs to be split up. I want to start in the backcourt. I want to start with Donovan Mitchell. I want to start with Darius Garland, because that's where all of these questions immediately go to. And the biggest question with the Cavs this entire offseason, really what I think is one of the biggest questions in the NBA, not just with the Cavs, but in the entire league, is what is Donovan Mitchell going to do when the Cavs offer him a contract extension? So the Cavs, by rule now in the NBA, are allowed to talk to Donovan Mitchell about a contract extension once the finals are over. NBA Finals, Boston, Dallas, you know it starts Thursday. It's been a really long time without basketball. Like, it feels like forever. But as soon as that series ends, whether one of these two teams wins in a sweep, one of these two teams wins in 7 games, or somewhere in the middle, once this series ends, the Cavs can talk to Donovan Mitchell about a contract extension. Donovan might not have an answer right away, might take a little bit of time. He might decide, hey, I love it in Cleveland. I want to sign this extension. I want to figure out how to win in Cleveland. Very well could be the answer. Or he could say, I'm not crazy about signing this extension. That will answer a lot of questions for the Cavs that they have. I don't think it answers all of the questions, but once that happens, eyes are going to look to either trading Donovan Mitchell or moving on from Darius Garland. I think there's a world in which it makes sense to move on from Darius Garland if Donovan Mitchell does commit to that contract extension. It was reported by The Athletic that if Mitchell does sign the extension, that Clutch Sports, Darius Garland's agency, would likely approach the Cavs and have a conversation about moving Darius to a different situation. I don't believe this is a situation where Darius and Donovan don't get along. That's not what I've witnessed firsthand. It's a situation as to where, maybe Darius Garland can't be the best version of Darius Garland in this situation. I think that's an understandable take to have. I totally get it. But I also don't know that is entirely true. I do think that they can get more out of Darius Garland in Cleveland alongside Donovan Mitchell, certainly than what happened this year, because you look at this season, It was a nightmare for Darius Garland. The fractured jaw, he could never really find a rhythm. When he did fracture his jaw, he couldn't eat for a number of weeks. He lost, I believe it was 15 pounds that he dropped during the season and had to try and find a way to put back on, which, I've never had my jaw broken. I've never lost that amount of weight that quickly and not been able to eat. But I can't imagine that was a very pleasant experience to go through. So while I'm not trying to sit here and say, oh, Darius Garland gets a pass for this year, you do have to explain the circumstances that created or helped to create this really nightmare of a season for Darius Garland. But I do think that there are ways that this pairing can work in Cleveland. I'm not saying that it's even necessarily the best way to go, but I think they can work. And one question that I have here when thinking about this is, Darius Garland is thought of as a true point guard, right? Where he is, I don't want to say the last of a dying breed because that's not true, but it's become a rare thing where you see the point guards that are really passed first, right? Where, when I was growing up, you would see someone like Steve Nash and really an early version of Chris Paul where their goal, their job was always to get others involved. And Darius is certainly cut along those lines. That's the cloth that he is cut from. And I actually think changing that just a little bit, just a little tweak. It doesn't need to be a major overhaul. It just needs to be a little tweak. I think doing that is something that could really help this offense grow. And that is, I believe, the way for Darius and Donovan to fit together. I think that Darius needs to up his three-point shooting, not the percentages. He's a good shooter. He didn't have a great year, but he's still a good shooter. Like, that's not something that's going to be questioned. But the volume needs to go up. Darius needs to be taking more of those attempts. I actually think both Darius and Donovan, if they're together next year, need to be attempting more catch and shoot three-pointers. I think that is something that could really help to unlock this Cavs offense because, and we're going to dive into the front court coming up in just a little bit, but I think that's something that could help to unlock this Cavs offense where you want to see this offense play with one big, three shooters, and a point guard, right? Like that is the blueprint right now in the NBA for a successful offense. Ideally, all five guys can shoot. But if you're not in that situation, that's what you want to have. You want to have that sort of blueprint. The Cavs don't have that right now, but I don't think it's necessarily because of Darius, because of Donovan. I think it has more to do with the front court. We'll get into that. But I think if Darius is more willing to take these catch and shoot three-pointers, if he's more willing to be more aggressive, trying to seek out his own scoring rather than forcing in other guys to be involved, I think that could go a really long way, not only in terms of his game improving and his stock improving, which, listen, I'm not a financial advisor, I can't give advice, but I would buy stock in Darius Garland. Like, that is where I'm at with this, not because I think he's going to be some MVP candidate or really anything ideally better than the third best player on the Cavs next year, but because his stock is so low right now, and I just know that's not the basketball player he is. I know he's a better basketball player than what we saw this year. But if the Cavs do have to pick between one of those two guys, the answer is so clear, it's so obvious, it's Donovan Mitchell. I am at the point now where I've been so impressed, and I know Donovan didn't finish the postseason because of that injury to his calf. But even if Donovan decides, you know what, I want to wait this out. I don't want to sign the extension. Not saying he's unhappy in Cleveland, but just doesn't want to commit right away. I still might look to move on from Darius Garland if that's the case. I'm not saying it's an easy decision. It's not. But I think that what the Cavs have in Donovan right now is special. And you could spend years trying to find a player as good as Donovan Mitchell when the Cavs have Donovan Mitchell. It's like that meme, can we get this? Oh, no, we have this at home. Well, the Cavs actually do have that at home in Donovan Mitchell. I think it can work with Darius, but if it doesn't, the answer's so clear to me which one should be moved on from. And it's not because one of them's not a good basketball player. They're both fantastic basketball players. It's that Donovan is, I think, one of the 10 best players in basketball since he's been on the Cavs. Go look at his numbers last year. Go look at what he did this year. When he's been on the floor and healthy, he's been an MVP candidate. The Cavs don't have another guy like that. And I don't think they have an avenue to find another guy like that. But I do think that because of that talent, they can make it work. I truly do think that they can make it work if they really, really amp up some aggressiveness from Darius Garland, and I think amp up three-point shooting volume from him in general, and the catch and shoot threes from both of them. I think that's the way to go offensively if the Cavs want to make this work. Up next, does it make sense to try and keep making the front court work? That I'm not so sure of. But today's show is presented to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel Sportsbook is one of my favorites to go to, and there are so many great plays right now with the NBA Finals, NHL Finals going on. It's winner take all in both of those. You've got the Finals, NBA, NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. You can't raise a trophy, but you can go home with some cash. I was browsing around the sportsbook earlier today, which I don't have access to right now in Florida. My background, I know, not ideal, but it is what it is. We'll get that straightened away. But I think that this NBA Finals is going to be a long series. And I was looking at FanDuel. Okay, I think this series is going to go 6 or 7, where you can bet, I bet Dallas to win or I bet Boston to win. You can get fine value, especially if you do think Dallas is going to pull off the upset. But bet the series MVP, because we know that if Dallas wins the finals, Luka Doncic is going to be the series MVP here. We don't know for certain that if Boston wins the finals that Jason Tatum would be the series MVP, but that's something I'd feel pretty good about. And FanDuel has the option to where you can put those together in an exacta. Maybe you like Luka Doncic and Dallas to win in 6 games, or maybe 7 games. Maybe you like Jason Tatum to win finals MVP and Boston to win in 6 games or 7 games. You can get odds on that at FanDuel right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So the Cavs have a decision to make in the backcourt, I believe, at some point. That decision might be made for them. But I do believe that the decision in the front court for the future of this basketball team, for the ceiling of this basketball team, is the more important one that they will have to make this offseason. They might not be the ones that make the decision in the backcourt. That might be made for them. But I believe that they have a decision to make in the front court, and that decision should be, it's time to split up Tower City. It's time to move on from one of Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley. Maybe you're out there thinking, hey, Jarrett Allen's been an all-star. He had the best year of his career. Yeah, he got banged up in the playoffs and couldn't finish, but he was so good this year. And truthfully, I think he proved a lot of people wrong after what happened last year in the playoffs against the New York Knicks. He came out, I thought he had a lot to prove this season on the floor. I thought he played like it. You look at the start of that series against Orlando, for the first couple of games, he was the best player on the Cavs. He was terrific. And then we know he went out with that rib injury. Things weren't great for him. Didn't play at all against Boston. Obviously didn't finish the series against Orlando in the first round either. But this isn't about Jarrett Allen. It's not. It's not about what Jarrett Allen is or isn't, because I think Jarrett Allen is a really good basketball player. I think he's a fantastic rim defender. I think that offensively he is in a terrific screen setter, maybe not quite elite, but I think he's a very, very good screen setter, which really helps to open up things offensively for some of the Cavs guards and ball handlers that they have. He's a great lob threat. He's reliable in the mid-range, but I don't think he's got the upside that Evan Mobley does. And I think that the only way the upside from Evan Mobley is going to come out is if he plays center offensively full-time. I think that has to be a requirement to get the most out of Evan Mobley. What Evan has done, particularly defensively this early in his career, has been really impressive. I love Evan's game. I've got a lot of stock in Evan Mobley. I still think that he can be more than an all-star. Like, I think he is someone that, if developed properly, can appear on all NBA teams. I think that he's going to be someone that we hear about in Defensive Player of the Year voting for a long, long time. He's special on that end of the floor, and I don't really think that's a debate, but it's also not a debate that the offense hasn't come around quick enough for Evan to this point. It hasn't. And I think part of that is because he's been playing out of position. Maybe when he first came into the league, and this team, of course, looked so different. Think back to his rookie year when the Cavs were not playing 2 7-footers. They were playing 3 7-footers at a time, as Lauri Markkanen was really the team's starting small forward. It was a much different look. And at that point in time, when, I think Evan was 20 when he played his first NBA game. Maybe he was still 19 as a one and done out of USC. I don't think he was ready to be a full-time center. And maybe even in year 2, I think you could probably make that case. But as we go into year 4 of Evan Mobley, I do think it's time to see that shift for him from being someone that is, playing center at times, but primarily a power forward, where he sees a lot of his minutes at the 4. Yes, he and Jarrett Allen are split up, certainly for significant chunks of the game. I actually don't know that the Cavs split those two up enough during games, but it's a difficult thing when you want to play all of your best players 35 minutes. Like, that's a tough task to ask of a coach that's putting together a rotation. But I do think that Evan needs to be playing the majority of his minutes at center, not just next year, but for the rest of his career. Because part of the thing that he's being asked to do as a power forward is create space, right? Where you can't have 2 non-shooters on the floor. Cavs have 2 guys in the backcourt that are respected shooters. Max Strus, I do think, and even some other guys that slide into that 3 spot do draw some attention on the outside. But when you've got a 4 that, and I know Evan was really good shooting the 3-pointer after coming back from knee surgery. I think he actually finished the season at like 37%. But that volume is so low that teams aren't going to respect him. Like, how often did you see, Evan was taking those threes, Evan was making those threes at a very respectable clip, but they're wide open. And they're wide open for a reason, because he's one of the guys that, when opposing teams are putting together their game plans, they're looking at that and say, okay, yeah, shoot that. That's fine. We don't care. Like, we will, if that shot gets made, we'll shake your hand. We'll move on to the next time. We'll just try and get a stop next time. Good for you. That's how teams, and I think we saw this with Isaac Okoro a little bit as well, too, where, he shot 40%, but teams aren't going to stick to him in the corner because they don't believe that he can shoot 40% over and over and over again. It's going to be the same thing with Evan Mobley, even if he does shoot 40% next year, because he's not shooting a ton of shots from the outside. That volume needs to go up, and I don't think you're actually getting the most out of him as an offensive player if you're asking him to shoot 5 or 6 or 7 3-pointers a game. And I think that's what it's going to take to get him to be an effective spacer. I don't think it's worth it at that point. I do think that the things he can do translates to playing center offensively. Yes, he still needs to get stronger. I firmly believe that that'll be the case this offseason. He's not going to be a finished product in year 4. Very few guys are. But I expect him to come into next season stronger and more able to play center. And with that, you look at that and say, okay, what can the Cavs do offensively to maximize Evan Mobley? I think it is playing center. I think him improving as a screen setter would go a long way, but he's also such a good passer in that short role in those situations to where I would trust him there. And I also think it's worth bringing up, I would love to see them run some inverted pick and rolls with him as a ball handling 5. It doesn't need to be, something that's super frequent, but a couple times a game, I think that could create some fun mismatches and be a fun wrinkle to throw in offensively. And of course, we don't know who the coach directing traffic is going to be, but I think Evan Mobley, it's time for him to be the full-time 5 on the Cavs. And the other part of this, if we're being honest, after the year that Jarrett Allen had, I'm not sure his value on the trade market is going to be much higher than it is this offseason. I get it. At the end of the year, because of the way that the playoffs went, and he didn't finish because of that rib injury, and some things were said by particularly Marcus Morris that, might not reflect well. I don't know how much of that's true. I don't know how much of it's not. but he still had a really good year. And he's still someone that I do believe a lot of teams across the NBA look at as a very, very valuable piece. He can do a lot of things really well on both ends of the floor, but I just don't think at this point it's still a fit with him and Evan Mobley. And I think that that's something that the Cavs really need to and should prioritize as they move forward, because their ceiling, yeah, Donovan Mitchell's going to raise it if he's still around, and I expect him to be. Donovan Mitchell's going to raise their floor. But the way their ceiling reaches its peak is if Evan Mobley is the one that pushes it up there. And I don't think Evan Mobley can do that unless he's the only big guy on the floor. I think that's the answer there. Up next, the Cavs have received permission to interview another head coach. We'll talk about a little bit about Micah Nori, where I think he falls into the coaching power rankings, straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. And today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Have therapy sessions when you can. BetterHelp will help you to do that. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today, and you can get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Going to therapy will be something that can change your life. A lot of people out there need help. Don't be alone in silence. Talk to somebody. It is something that absolutely can help to put you right back on the proper track. Go to BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, and you can get 10% off your first month. So earlier on Monday, it was reported by ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski that the Cavs have received permission. This is now head coaching candidate number 5 that we're hearing about. The Cavs have received permission to speak with Micah Nori, who I think is one of the, I guess at this point, more popular assistant coaches in basketball because of the postseason that he had. So if you don't know about Micah Nori, he is the lead assistant currently of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the reason why there's been such a spotlight on him during the first round for Minnesota is they swept the Phoenix Suns out in 4 games. Minnesota head coach Chris Finch was run into on the sideline by Mike Conley Jr. Turns out it was a pretty nasty injury for Chris Finch. He needed to have knee surgery, coached the rest of the postseason from behind the bench, and Micah Nori was the guy that was roaming the sidelines for Minnesota. So he's got, I guess, a really unique experience. I can't think of very many other situations like that where you've seen an assistant coach have to step up in the playoffs. Not just, you'll see it for a game here, for a game there. Like I talked about on yesterday's show, there have been times where Chris Quinn has filled in for Eric Spoelstra, but not for, in this situation, for an entire playoff run, or I guess the majority of a playoff run, not an entire one, but a significant chunk of it. It's a really interesting situation. The other area you might know Micah Nori from is his interviews with Bally Sports North. He typically, or I guess at times, has been the guy, like, you watch a Cavs game on Bally Sports Ohio, and coming back from halftime, Serena Winters will get, a couple of questions in with a Cavs assistant coach, whether it was JJ Outlaw, Greg Buckner, Luke Walton, someone like that. Micah Nori would be that guy oftentimes on Bally Sports North during halftime of a Wolves game as they would be coming back to start the third quarter. Go look up Micah Nori's clips on the internet. Pretty funny guy. I think that's what a lot of his popularity is from. It's not to take away from who he is as a coach, but if you see him, it's going to be, if you recognize him, for the most part, it's because you watch the playoffs with the Wolves with him on the sidelines, or you've seen these videos go viral on social media of him giving an interview to Bally Sports North. But he does have quite a track record, so he's been an assistant in the NBA for quite a long time at this point. Norrie spent time in Toronto. He spent time in Sacramento, Denver, Detroit, Minnesota. So he's been around for quite a while in the NBA. I think that there are a couple of things that are interesting about his candidacy here. And one of them, and I just got done talking about the two big situation here in Cleveland, but coming from a situation in which Minnesota plays two bigs frequently, sometimes they play three, when you factor in Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, Naz Reid. Coming from that situation, not saying that he's the offensive mastermind behind it, because I certainly think Chris Finch rightfully gets a lot of that credit for the way the Wolves operate on that end of the floor. But coming from that situation and understanding how it worked there, I do think is a plus there. Being at least some part of the development of Anthony Edwards, I think is a plus there as well. And coming from a program that, in Minnesota, when he arrived there, and I was there for part of the Ryan Saunders era, those teams weren't very good. It was a really impressive build up from what they were 3 years ago when Chris Finch took over, 3 or 4 years ago at this point, to what the Minnesota Timberwolves are now. And Micah Norrie is someone that, as I said, has been around a long time in the NBA. He's also spoken with the Lakers, or the Lakers have at least received permission to talk to Micah Norrie, according to ESPN. And I do want to talk about a little bit, probably on tomorrow's show, about which of those two openings is the more attractive opening. But he's someone that if he doesn't get a job this year, and I don't foresee any other openings popping up other than the Cavs and the Lakers, but if he doesn't get a head coaching job this year, I would expect him to probably get one within the next couple of years. I think Micah Norrie is a good coach. Someone that would be very interesting. I don't think he's quite at the top of my list when you look at coaching candidates. Like, I would certainly still have Kenny Atkinson number one. Still, I'm not crazy about James Borrego. I think there are other people that are higher on him than I am. But he's definitely, Micah Norrie, definitely part of that second tier. But we'll see what happens. I still think there's a long way to go in this coaching search. I think we're going to hear about more names that the Cavs either get permission to interview or, don't need necessarily permission to interview because they're not on a staff currently. I don't think this is the end of what we're going to hear regarding this Cavs coaching search. Like I said earlier in this show, Friday's episode, I would like to do a mailbag. I want to get to know each other a little bit. I'm new here. You're new listening to me. I want to get to know you guys. I want you guys to get to know me. You can shoot questions about the Cavs, or even, some questions about me too. I really want you guys to get to know me. I want to get to know you as well. Shoot me questions. You can email the show at Lockdown Cavs. You can comment on this YouTube video and also tomorrow's YouTube video. I'll be checking the comments. I'll be writing down questions. Or you can tweet at me. Find me on Twitter at RealDCunningham. I can't wait to get to some of your questions. I can't wait to get to know you guys a little bit better. And I really, really can't wait for you guys to get to know me better as well. So that'll come up later in the week. But on tomorrow's show, I do want to dive in just a little bit more to the coaching search. Probably some more Donovan Mitchell stuff as well. But thank you for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day.